Hey there, folks, and it's a balmy August night tonight here in the Miskatonic Valley. And tonight is August 20th, that is the 132nd anniversary of the birthday of one of my favorite horror authors of all times, namely H.P. Lovecraft. And as such, I decided, as I have in previous videos, that tonight would be a good night for me to take a little departure from my usual chilling bedtime story for you and read one of my stories that was quite literally inspired by the old gentleman. And in this case, I based it off of an unused idea that he'd left behind in this little journal of unused ideas. And this one I wrote for this anthology, Shadows in Salem, one of the first ones that I submitted to from, if you can see the name, Amber Newbury's Fun Dead Publications. One of my all-time favorite editors to work with and favorite publishing houses to work with. Amber's doing a great job. She's moved on to other things besides publishing, but I wish her all good fortune and everything that she does, and she's had a lot of good fortune. So, without further ado, let's commence. The Thing in the Graveyard by yours truly, R.C. Mulhare. I don't know, Amanda. On Halloween, I'd just like to chill with some horror flicks and man the bribe bowl, I said, cradling the phone against my shoulder as I emptied a bag of mini Hershey bars into a large black plastic bowl decorated with orange bats. Then came 5 words that an introvert most dreads hearing from the person they like. Come on, it'll be fun. My inborn people-pleasing tendencies made it hard for me to say no to Amanda when she used that wheedling voice, asking me to come along with her and her pack of friends. I drew in a breath. You're all right. Okay, see you at the T-station in Salem about 7, she chirped. I started to remark on the horrors of the MBTA and the repellent state of the cars on the commuter rail, but she hung up before I could get the words out. I sighed before hanging up and went to hunt up a witch hat from last Halloween, popping that on over what I had on, a long-sleeved black Court of Thorns t-shirt, black jeans, and black motorcycle boots, before finding my black leather jacket and hauling it on. Keys, wallet, phones, shoving them into my pocket before calling out to Danny, my cousin and roommate, that she'd have to man the candy bowl tonight since Amanda had invited me along on a jaunt to Salem. You're going to Salem on Halloween night? Danny asked me, her head around the bedroom door. Amanda can be hard to resist when she really turns on the wheedle, I said. An hour later, I stepped off the commuter train packed with other haunted happenings goers, some in costume, some pulling the hurried throw-on something thing I had done, some families, including a few with wee kids in adorable costumes, pumpkins and princesses, ickle skeletons and superheroes. We poured out onto the platform with even more people disembarking who'd had the same idea. Like the stars that Halloween fell on a weeknight, otherwise even more people would have taken the tea. Amanda, at the furthest edge of the crowd on the platform with a colorful kerchief on her head, started jumping up and down, waving to me, the huge hoop earrings on her ears bobbing. She opted for a Viennese operetta gypsy costume this year after several Halloweens as various witches, enchantresses, and Renaissance ladies. Shay, over here! She dragged along Tamika and Gary, the former dressed as a pixie fairy, though she had the foresight to make it a cold weather fairy with thick arm warmers and gossamer wings over several layered pastel t-shirts. The latter had made about the same amount of effort that I had, only with a pirate hat and an eye patch over a black shirt and black jeans. Planning to drink enough rum to keep warm, I asked Gary when I made my way through the crowd to join them. I thought to button my jacket over my chest against whatever chill came in off the ocean. If I get a chance to, he said with a grin. Tamika looked up and down at Amanda in her gypsy get-up. Really? Do you realize the Romani people are a culture, not a costume, and they don't actually dress like that, except maybe if they're on the carny circuit because it's what the crowd expects? Grandma always said we had some gypsy blood on her side, Amanda said, airily twirling at her colorful skirts swirling as she ignored Tamika's concern. Says the girl dressed like a pixie, Gary said, looking at Tamika. Do all pixies dress like that? Pixies are fantasy creatures. They're hardly the same as a real-world ethnic group, Tamika replied, hands on hips. It's actually a sanitized version of the original Pixie Fairy. They started out as troublemakers and not particularly cute ones, I said. Someone needs to dress as that kind of fairy, Gary said with the kind of grin that he meant to look sinister, but which only looked goofy, chalking up to Gary's red hair and pasty Irish freckle face. So we got to go to the movies, or we got to talk about costumes and social theory, Amanda said. I think the general consensus was we were going to the movies, Gary said. We took the long walk down Washington Street to the Essex Street Pedestrian Mall and then to Cinema Salem for back-to-back Universal monster movies as part of a marathon. Nothing really frightening by today's standards, but certainly eerie. I could see why that old gent from Providence, who'd wrote Horror, didn't find them especially terror-inducing. Once Gary had started getting hungry for something other than popcorn and the rest of us had gotten restless, we headed out, Amanda leading the way past the rock fountain in the middle of Museum Place and into the costumed throng on the pedestrian wall. Several zombies, some with convincing gore makeup, some with not so convincing ragbag reject clothes and cheap green face makeup, slutty fairy tale characters, and a big guy in a gorilla suit towed along on a chain by a girl dressed like Fay Ray. Someone was wearing a Cthulhu mask and squamous green latex handpieces over a business suit with a huge "Vote for Cthulhu. Why settle for a lesser evil?" button pinned to the lapel. Gotta love the stuff people come up with during election years. Totally edges out the people in candidate caricature masks. There were also any number of slutty witches, to Amanda's annoyance. I had very nearly collided with a very real-looking Lon Chaney-esque wolfman who growled at me in a not real way. Not wanting to let the guy down, I reared back, letting out a stage yelp. Coming the other way, we met a ghost tour with a woman in 1600s garb and a hooded cloak leading the way, carrying a lantern before her, with a group of obvious tourists trailing behind her, carrying candles of their own, hanging on the guide's every word, just said in an eerie stage hush. We landed at Rockefeller's, Amanda's favorite haunt, pardon the pun, in Salem, for drinks and appetizers. No cheap bars for her, and with her picking up the tab, I certainly couldn't complain. No vampire ball this year? Tamika asked once we had settled at a table on the patio, the better to watch the costumed passers-by. I thought it was the vampire and witches ball, I said. No, they aren't having one this year, Amanda said with a sigh. Any reason why? I asked. Puritan fathers objecting to the shameless displays of wantonness and the pagan music? Gary said. Amanda poked him under the table with her foot. No, they had problems getting funding. The bane of every fun event's existence, Tamika grumbled with resignation. But back to that thing about the costumes earlier. Isn't dressing at Halloween supposed to help you hide from whatever ghosts and goblins may have slipped across the veil? I asked. Says the person who just threw on a witch hat over their regular stuff, Amanda said. I was in a hurry because someone called me on short notice, I said. Someone behind me cleared their throat. I always took the wearing of costumes to be a means of hiding in plain sight through showing a part of one, the true self, that we hide from everyone, perhaps even ourselves, said a gruff voice behind me. I looked over my shoulder and spotted, sitting at the next table, a very tall, very thin guy with a long, sharp-featured face, his lank hair low on his forehead and his eyes hooded so deep it made it hard to see them easily. Something about his face gave him a vaguely feral look, as if he had a set of costume fangs covering his teeth, but he didn't lisp when he talked, likely a vampire or werewolf lifestyler who'd had a set of high-quality veneers put in by a dentist. I took him for an actor on break from one of the little theaters or ghost walks in towns, or the storytelling at the witch house, given the 19th century frock coat he wore and the top hat sitting in front of him on his table. See that? Amanda said to Tamika with an "I told you so" smirk. Arr, that makes me inner self a pirate, Barry growled. I would have shaken my head, but with my own lame attempt at costuming, I couldn't really throw those metaphoric stones. Tamika ignored them both, but I could see her face tighten a bit. So how does that explain people dressing as zombies or werewolves or something like this, besides them being horror fan kids? It might reflect the monster that lurks inside every one of us, even the so-called best of us, the tall guy said. So does that make your inner self a guy in a Jane Austen movie? Gary asked. The guy gave him a quiet smile, but that somehow didn't make his face any less unsettling. It's a reflection of who I might have been in another life. So we're one of those past life people? Tamika asked, darting a look across the street to a psychic sidewalk booth draped in dark fabric covered in glow-in-the-dark stars and moons. Perhaps not past lives, but perhaps an alternate route I could have taken, or one I might be taking now. I believe that parts of our personalities, fragments drifting from our souls, like some kind of psychic answer to the body shedding spent cells, linger in the mortal world and attach themselves to new lives beginning their journey, the tall guy said. If life is a form of energy, and the energy of this world cannot be created nor destroyed, but rather transformed, then it would make sense for some of the personality to become energy at the end of one life and return to the aether from which it came. Whoa, that's pretty deep, Amanda said. I don't think I've had enough to drink to really buy into that, Gary said, looking at his beer. Then allow me to buy you another round to help open the portals of your mind a little wider, the guy said, signaling to a passing waitress to refill our drinks, which she did. Thanks, but I'm good, I said, looking to my vodka and cranberry juice, more cranberry juice than vodka. When I looked up, true to the archetype, the guy had gone. Where'd that dude in the Jane Austen coat get to? Gary asked. Probably had to get back to the event he was involved in and left quick, Tamika said. The night wore on, and toward midnight, the crowds of passers-by had thinned, some likely attending the closing ceremonies on the town common, others going home. Come on, let's go to the cemetery, Amanda said. She had that let's take a risk that isn't too risky look in her eye that she often got when she had a few. Which cemetery? Gary asked, raising an eyebrow, clearly game for whatever scheme she had in mind. Is that really a wise thing to do? I said. I bet a lot of people have the same idea. Someone had to supplement Aunt Amanda's voice of reason when hers gets impaired. The one behind the Peabody Essex Museum, the old burying point, of course, she said. She had to pick the one right in the middle of everything, I thought. It dawned on me, though, that if she had to pick one for her harebrained midnight romp, she'd made a wise choice. With it smack in the middle of the downtown area, or more or less, that gave us fewer chances for something stupid to happen. With more people around us, maybe a cop or two, to say nothing of other people with the same idea, we'd have some amount of safety in numbers in case something should go horribly wrong. Not that I believed something nasty would come out of the stonework, but that one malicious or disturbed person could turn up to do things that she shouldn't do anywhere, least of all in a graveyard. Sure enough, when we arrived, we realized we hadn't come up with the most original plan. Someone had put out rows of candles along with flowers and food offerings on the stone benches set into the wall that make up the witch trial memorial. A short, slight figure in a long black coat paced around one stone in a slow circle, sprinkling something around it, while a few others moved around the stones and the box tombs by the Charter Street entrance. "Oh no, zombies!" Amanda said, dramatically moving in closer and clinging to Gary's arm. Gary pointed to the one grave that the small dark figure had circled. "Let's go check out that one grave. Wonder why someone was moving around it." "Trying to raise the ghost of the person buried under it," Tamika asked as we made our way over there. "They shouldn't play around with that. The dead should be left alone. And for that matter, if you try and call up a dead person, you might call up something nasty that's taking advantage of your curiosity." "Oh, so no seances in the graveyard?" Gary asked with a pout in his voice. "She's got a point. It's not a good idea, especially on Halloween when the veil is thin," I said. Gary turned to look at Tamika. "You really believe that stuff? How much did you have to drink? Because that doesn't sound like you and your skeptical mouth." "I wouldn't want to take chances," Tamika said, her wings rustling in a shrug. By now, we'd come close to that one grave, a stone with a rounded top and narrow shoulders cased inside of newer stone. Clearly, someone had broken the original stone off at the base at one point, and the historical preservation organizations had restored it. Gary took out his phone and hit the flashlight app, shining light on the face of the stone. "Here lies interned ye body of Colonel John Hathorne, Esquire, aged 76 years, who died May the 10th, 1717. "Oh no, the hanging judge!" Amanda whimpered, taking a step back and tracing a pentagram in the air before her. "I kid you not, her folks raised her Catholic, so she does this instead of making the sign of the cross like her Irish grandmother does when something weird or unsettling happens. Some habits just evolve rather than fade away." "Amanda, he's gone. He's been gone since the 1700s. He can't hurt you," Tamika said, putting a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Well, that would explain why someone would pour salt around his grave. Put a ring of salt, preferably blessed around it, and if he tries to rise, he'll be contained," I said. "That is, if he'd rise from here. Ghosts usually don't stick around their graves, or so I've heard," Tamika said. Then dryly she said, "Wonder what he'd make if he came back to Salem today." "For starters, he'd probably be scandalized by all the psychic studios and occult bookshops," I said. "Aren't some of his victims buried here?" Tamika said. "Bet he'd really be really burned up knowing his body is lying in the same ground with them." "I think Giles Corey is around here somewhere, and some of the Pickman family members are," I said, looking around. "Most of the hanging victims didn't get the dignity of a proper burial. Their bodies got dumped in a pit on Gallows Hill like so much garbage," Amanda said, bitter-toned. I didn't blame her, and I squeezed her shoulder again, letting her know she had me for company in that feeling. Gary spread his hand, making what I could at best call ooga-booga gestures, for lack of a better description. "John Hathorne, I command thee to arise," he said in a deep, too goofy to sound creepy voice. "Ooh, so scary," I drawled, not convinced in the least. "And you just asked about seances in the graveyard?" "John Hathorne, I command thee to arise," Gary intoned again, ignoring me and making those stupid fake magical gestures. "Gary, this isn't a game," Tamika warned. "Knock it off!" Gary only ignored us. "John Hathorne, I command thee to arise," he called out. "Gary, knock it off, or so help me, we are never going to Salem, you and me together, ever again," Amanda snapped. Gary lowered his hands. Then a breeze arose, rattling the dry leaves of an oak tree overhead, stripping a cascade of leaves from the swaying branches and tumbling them over us. "Now you've done it," Amanda growled, looking up at Gary. "Now he's going to haunt us. He'll have a field day with me because I'm a witch." Gary plucked a leaf from under his shirt collar and reached for the neck of her peasant blouse, trying to pull out another. But she pulled away. "Yeah, he's going to stuff leaves down our shirts." Another gust rose, scattering the fallen leaves about our feet and sending a cold draft up under my jacket. The timing with Gary's fake invocation, plus the late hour of the holiday and the number of drinks we'd had made it all the more unsettling. We're down near the ocean. It gets windy, Tamika said, trying to sound flat-voiced. The candle flames on one memorial nearby flattened, guttered, then went out, casting our surroundings in shadow. Dark, Gary muttered. I almost said stating the obvious, but the back of my neck had started to prickle. A tall shape loomed up from the darkness, making its way between and among the tombstones. It was the man with the top hat whom we'd spoken to in the sidewalk cafes, though something about the way he walked sent a skin-prickling sensation along the backs of my limbs and down my spine, as if he was slightly out of sync with the rest of the landscape, if not the rest of the world. What's he doing here? Amanda whispered. Maybe he's here for some adventure to pay his respects to someone, I said, hoping that alone had brought him to the graveyard. Why are we whispering? Tamika asked, but the wobble in her own already lowered voice answered that question. She felt it too, for all her reasonableness. The figure approached a tomb at a near distance from us, a stone close to the ground, either by accident or design, given the way he stooped down over it. He slid his hands under it, the way someone would slip their hands under the edge of the lid on a trunk, and lifted it, like it moved on hinges. A greenish, flickering light shone from under the stone, as if the slab covered the entrance to some underground vault where someone had lit a fire or torches. Chanting and deep guttural voices rose up from the depths, punctuated by a slow-beating drum and the atonal skirling of a flute. Without so much as a glance around, the figure stepped into the cavity underneath, descending as if down a staircase below, leaving the stone raised. Let's get out of here now, Tamika said, trying not to whimper, but I felt her edge towards me, trying not to get singled out. Anyone want to check that out? Gary said, taking a step toward the open vault. Bet there's a bitchin' party going on down there. No, you better not either, Amanda warned, starting toward the Liberty Street entrance, but pausing to look back at him. Well, more fun for me, Gary said, walking toward the vault. A shadow moved within the vault, and a head reared up, vaguely canine in profile, the hair mangy and fur-like over the forehead, but longer and lank over the shoulders, dog hair melding into human. A grin crossed its face, uncovering fangs that didn't belong in a human's mouth. Gary howled, panicking and stumbling back, turning to run, but the thing clamped a hand on to his left ankle. Come to join the festival? The thing rasped. Gary screamed again and fought to wrench himself loose. I broke loose from standing with the girls and lunged forward, grabbing Gary by the shoulders, knocking the pirate hat off his head and hauling him away from that thing. I dragged him stumbling between the stones, heading back through the Witch Trial Memorial, Tamika and Amanda yelling at our heels as we bolted for Liberty Street into a crowd threading its way out toward Derby Street. We didn't stop until Gary's ankle buckled under him and he collapsed, pulling me down with him. People in the crowd pulled away, some staring, one guy chuckling and commenting on the awesome makeup, but his sexy witch companion scolded him. What was that thing? Tamika said, panting and looking back. No idea. Weren't there stories of people in the witch trials beating dog-like things out in the woods, returning into black dogs? I asked. I thought that happened in Dogtown, Amanda said. Maybe the dog things ended up there after the witch hysteria, I said. I can't feel my foot, Gary moaned. I looked down to check for injuries. Not only had the thing peeled off his shoe and socket, it also raked the skin, degloving half his foot. You kids all right? Asked an older gent in a top hat with steampunk goggles perched on it over a Victorian suit bedecked with rivets along the seams. No, a dog came out of nowhere and bit our friend in the foot, Amanda babbled. Someone call 911, I yelled, peeling off my jacket and wrapping it around Gary's foot, bracing on it to try and stop the bleeding. There's a first aid station nearby, the sexy witch said, coming forward to help me lift Gary from the pavement. We carried him to the first aid station, but the EMTs there could only do so much on the spot. The four of us piled into an ambulance, Tamika and I riding in the back, while Amanda huddled in the front with the driver, a blanket around her shoulders. We're gonna die, Gary muttered under his oxygen mask. You're doing fine, the EMT kneeling over him said, looking him in the eye to keep him focused. We didn't get out of Salem until daybreak, when the train started running again, after we'd spent the night sacked out on chairs in the waiting room area of the North Shore Medical Center, waiting to hear from the doctors about Gary's condition. Amanda thought to call Gary's parents, and his dad arrived shortly, jeans thrown on over pajamas, asking us what had happened. Someone's pit bull got loose and attacked him in the graveyard, Amanda said, speaking for the group, telling him what he'd believe. If we said anything else, if we told him what we'd seen, he'd never believe us. He'd think we'd had too many drinks, or someone messed with him, or we'd done drugs in that graveyard, got some bad stuff and had a collective psychotic break. Maybe we had, but I think I can see why people saw strange things in Salem back in the day. I had class later that morning, and I had to leave, so I didn't miss it. Plus, I had to bring a doctor's note along with me on Gary's behalf. No way the doctors would have let him out of the hospital with his foot torn up. Plus, they had him under observation in case he'd contracted rabies. Gary's mom came later, and according to Amanda, started yelling threats to sue the event planners for not keeping the downtown area more secure. as if they could foresee errant loose dogs, much less errant dog person things living in a vault under the graveyard. The police later investigated, even taking a look around the slab where we said the dog had appeared. The slab lay partly lifted the next day, which the media described as the result of vandalism, but they found nothing else. No sign of a vault, much less something a dog could have come out of, either due to shoddy detective work or maybe because the thing cleared out overnight. Of course, they never found the dog that matched the description we gave to wit, a huge black pit bull mix, though they did find a Yorkie mix that had gotten loose from a nearby apartment. A veterinarian kept it in case the dog also showed signs of rabies, but none of us in our group believed for a minute that they'd caught the culprit. I later went back to the burying ground and got a look at the slab, which bore the name Pickman. That hit a little too close for comforts. I'd seen the name in a history of local art. He was an artist back in the 1920s who'd gotten obsessed with painting dog-like monsters before he'd vanished in Boston under strange circumstances. Meantime, Amanda broke up with Gary, at least romantically. She decided she couldn't put that kind of trust in a guy who'd stick his nose where it didn't belong, particularly a graveyard vault. At least they've stayed friends. Given the amount of therapy, physical and psychological, he has ahead of him, he needs all the friendship he can get. He's gotten back to drawing again, and not the kind of curvaceous, bodacious fantasy babes he used to draw, but ghoulish things, like the thing that attacked him. His therapist seemed to think it will help him get past the trauma of the attack, but I think they've put an optimistic slant on it. You see, a lot of the ghouls he draws look too much like himself. So, that one was inspired, as I said, by an idea that was left behind in H.P. Lovecraft's Commonplace book, this little notebook of unused ideas that he'd left at the time of his death. In fact, he'd passed it on to a friend of his, R.H. Barlow, who was another weird fiction writer. And this one was something like seeing a strangely dressed man in a public gathering and then seeing the same guy later on in a graveyard somewhere. So I wrote this one, and it was kind of interesting. I started writing it in, I think it was January of 2016, and it was one of those things I'd taken a break from writing during December and the early part of January because work gets busy working at a grocery store. So, and I allow myself some time off from writing, or at least writing with a view to getting something published directly. I try not to schedule any deadlines during December because I know that I'm not going to meet them. So, but in a spirit of getting back on the saddle, I decided we're just going to write a story based on one of these ideas left behind by Lovecraft, and started working on it and was having fun doing it. And I was looking at some open calls on horrortree.com when, lo and behold, I find an open call for stories set in Salem. And I was like, well, I had started out setting the story in Arkham, which is H.P. Lovecraft's fictionalized analog to Salem. But all it took was a simple, search and replace in my Word document to just, fix it up and make it into a Salem story. And, maybe one or two details had to be turned back from Arkham to Salem. But, I pretty much had gone with taking the basic topography of downtown Salem and made that into downtown Arkham with maybe, I think, one or two changes made originally, but changed them back. And, the rest they say is history. So this one, I've read this at a couple different public readings. One was at the Witch House, Amber's semi-annual Write Like a Girl event, which is a charity reading to help the Witch House's charity, which is an organization which helps girls in Africa who have been falsely accused of witchcraft. It helps take care of them, take care of their families, get them legal protection and whatnot. Yeah, pretty much it's like modern day stuff, modern day version of the Salem witch hunt going on in some of these villages and towns in Africa where something goes wrong and somebody has a beef with another person. It's, oh, your kid is a witch and she put a curse on my tractor or my cow or whatever, So this, it's a noble cause, and I'm happy to take part in helping support it because who needs to go through that? I mean, as I've talked elsewhere, I have an ancestor on my mother's side who was implicated in what's called the spectral evidence in the Salem witch hunt in the trial documents. By spectral evidence, I mean, two people are arguing whether or not somebody or other is a witch, and one party will come forward and say, "Oh, I saw the ghost of so and so in a dream, and he told me that Goodman Pickman is did such and such evil things, and he's a witch." So I'll tell that story at greater length at another time, but I'm so fond of this story that I kind of got into a mode of what happens next to these people. So I'm actually planning on, and kind of off and on again, off again, writing a full short novel length version of this. I think I'm going to wind up entitling it Pickman's Art Therapy, because I did inspire this more or less somewhat teed off from Lovecraft's rather famous story, Pickman's Model, which, as mentioned in this story, deals with a guy who's an artist who sees these strange creatures in, I can't remember if it was a graveyard or it was a subway tunnel, but it was somewhere in Boston. He sees these weird sort of dog-faced humanoid figures, and he gets fascinated with them and obsessed by them and starts painting all these weird paintings of them. And the obsession just spirals out, as it does in many a Lovecraft story. So I've been working on that, on a longer version of this, basically taking it and expanding on it, and show, because it got into my head, what happens next? Does Gary fully recover from this incident? What happens to everybody? Where do they go from here? So no idea when that will come out, but hopefully. I've had a little bit of a writing slump. Life's been a little crazy and my health's been a little strange lately, so I've kind of taken an enforced break from writing. So hopefully I can get back to writing the full-length version, and hopefully I can find somebody who'd be willing to, put the full-length version to print. So, it's getting late, it's getting tired, and this video is getting long, so I'm going to end here for now. And so, as always, hope you folks enjoy the story. If you like this, give this video an upvote. If you like listening to my stories, be sure and click the notification bell so you'll be notified whenever I do one of these live streams. And as always, you folks keep it spooky.